discussion talk about how the ideas talked about in the presentation could be applied to our very own neighbors. Should we set aside? So the pictures are going to kind of flow along. If you want to get particularly, and I'll try and point out some of them that relate to where I am, because there's some of them more. But if you want to just say, hey, what the heck is that? So, you have no idea what I went through to try and do this in Spanish, but now we're okay, so food sovereignty. Well, better angles, I can see. The land of lily close. So, just as a tiny bit of background for me personally, my name is Nick Paget Clark, and I publish a magazine called In Motion Magazine, which has been on the internet for 16, 17 years. And in the last 5 to 10 years, did a lot of interviews with different people in different countries, and discovered that a lot of what people were, the point was to investigate grassroots organizing and just talk to people about what was going on in their areas. And a lot of people I noticed that were involved in trying to make a better world as far as building democracy in their countries, it turned out that they were involved in creating food also. So I started asking, well, what's the connection? And that ended up turning into a book, which quotes extensively from those interviews, and then some of the ideas. And then out of it just came all sorts of ideas that I had truly no idea that I was going to run into. In fact, I kept finding that everything that I thought I knew was wrong, and it was all upside down. So the main theme is food sovereignty and free trade, but this is just actually part of what got put together during these interviews, and sort of the heart of it is what is the connection between food creation and democracy. And so what I learned, though, is that there are millions of people around the world who are farmers, indigenous people, and peasants who are rejecting one world and actually starting to build another one. And this is a new world that, as they told me, is based on a horizontal network of networks, and it's based on local self-sustaining agriculture, autonomous decision-making, and economies, and perhaps most importantly is based on human relations, which are based on solidarity, reciprocity, and dignity. So in looking at and continually asking people, well, what is the connection between creating food and creating democracy, it emerged that there are things that they have in common, things which bind them and things which tear them apart. What they have in common is that they're both vital to human survival, both individually and socially, which was also a point that I would find things that related to people as individuals, but that they also related to how the whole society worked. So for food, we need food in order to live as a person, obviously, and we need democracy in order to express who we are individually, what we think, what we believe. And socially, we need, for food, we have to figure out as a society how to create food to feed everybody, not just the people that are actually farmers. And that for democracy, we need to have a process so that we can collectively make intelligent decisions. So what binds them, since that picture's been there for a while, these are pigs on farm in Missouri, and they are on family farms, just like those cows are on family So what binds them are three things: land, an understanding of biodiversity, and culture. For land, you obviously need the land in order to grow the food, and as Bertha Blanco, a person in whose picture may show up at some point, in Bolivia told me, we can't live in the air. And also without land you can't self-govern. You need to control the land, or as we say these days, you need to occupy the land. You have to have, and what emerged was a really deep understanding of biodiversity, and with it a cosmology that comes along with it. With that understanding of biodiversity, you can develop something like agroecology, so that you can have a healthy diet, a healthy agriculture, and a healthy planet. And on a parallel level, for society, when you have an understanding of biodiversity, it turns out, you start to understand what is the balance of nature, and you start to say, well, why don't we have that same kind of balance in our social relations between people, based on horizontal social networks, similar to in biodiversity. And in culture, what the kind of culture that people have experienced for thousands of years, and what they are trying to both hang on to and promote, is one that's based on human conscience and consciousness, on solidarity and reciprocity, which again flows from an understanding of the cosmology that comes with understanding biodiversity. But it's a culture that's not only obvious in our meals that relate to our particular culture, or in our art, in our social customs, but yes?
Psyched on her.
That would be Vandana Shiva, you may have heard of. She's a doctor of physics, a feminist, and an organizer in India, who has done a lot of great work in India, specifically saving seas, talking against genetic engineering, and helping to organize people around those things. And I interviewed her 3 times, actually. Once in Missouri at a biodevastation conference, once in South Africa at the United Nations Sustainability Conference, and once in India. This is in India. This was a demonstration that she, in fact, there are 2 people in white next to her are former prime ministers. There were actually 3 or 4 prime ministers. There was a giant march against the WTO in New Delhi.
How often are there biodevastation conferences?
Well, I went to the first one, and so I know that there was one. Then I think there was one a couple of years later, actually in San Diego, which I went to, and some of that came to that. I'm not on the list, so I don't know how often they have them, but they're certainly concerned that it's going on. And I learned an amazing amount of really brilliant thought from the people at that conference. It was in St. Louis, Missouri, and everybody from the conference went down the road to Monsanto and told them what they thought of them, and biodevastation of people in the homes. But it did make me realize just amazing things that are even beyond our general understanding of genetic engineering. For example, the possible consequences of pouring, Roundup, not on the earth, not only are you destroying the earth, but one professor was talking about the possibility of actually genetically altering the little microbes such that it could cause a virus that could then kill other little microbes and just literally wipe out the soil on the planet. I mean, they were seriously talking about biodevastation. So even beyond the stuff that we learn regularly, which is awful, there are levels of it that can go to which we don't even.
What is that? TEGEL? What does that stand for?
I think Tegel this is in New Zealand, in Auckland.
Oh, okay.
There was a conference. The government of New Zealand actually said, should we do GMOs? And had a whole discussion for the whole country, which is pretty rare. Certainly never happened here. And so I went with a farmer from the National Family Farm Coalition, and people that helped get us there, and we went to their office with Greenpeace. So that while they were already involved in many campaigns, the New Zealand Greenpeacers, and one of them was against the company Hegel. They didn't want their chickens to be fed GMO corn. And to make that point, one of the women I interviewed, actually, a giant grain ship came into the harbor in Auckland. They got on the boats. You want to talk about direct action? They got on the boats, went out to the ship in the middle of the night, climbed up the anchor, up the chain of the anchor, and then climbed up the masts, and then chained themselves to the top of the masts of these giant freighters. It's caused a bit of disturbance in Auckland, but it made their point. And then I have a picture in the magazine that I borrowed from one of them of a cop to make his way along, a chain at the top of the mast to try and arrest her and cut her off. So she was very brave. Anyway, that's that little story. Where was it? Oh yes. So there's those aspects of our culture. But there are other aspects of our culture which we don't even get to participate in, and which the process that they're doing is getting into that aspect of our culture. How do we run our economy? How do we run our governance? What is the culture of exchanging of products in your culture, in your society? So out of that actually comes an understanding that not only are reciprocity and solidarity nice, they're a pleasant way for people to treat each other, it turns out they're actually vital. Without that, we're not going to survive. So what divides them is the same three things, and threatens our survival: the taking of land, the non-understanding of biodiversity, and the destruction of people's culture. Obviously, if you don't have land, you can't grow food on it, which is why Zapata and the Zapatistas of 100 years ago and of today, the slogan is land, tierra y libertad. Without that land, you can't even grow your food. How are you even going to talk about your libertad? Simultaneously, if the whole land, the whole area has been taken, whether it be by an invading army or by a bunch of multinational corporations, you have no ability to control your lives. If you don't understand or don't really give a rat's ass about what biodiversity is, you end up with the situations that we have today, where you launch the Green Revolution and you destroy the earth, you have deforestation, you destroy the climate, and potentially the viability of life on the planet. And the destruction of people's cultures, which is common, denying people the right to speak their own language, denying people the right to their foods, but denying people the right to run their own economy, to run how they exchange what they produce. You end up having a society based not on conscience, but on things, on commodities, on everything that needs to be bought and sold. That leads to their version of the world, which is not a horizontal world, but a vertical world, where everything is verticalized and centralized. You verticalize production, you centralize capital, and you end up in a world of poverty, crime, and war. Time to go back to occupying the land. So, somewhere in there is a picture of Luis Macas.
He's coming.
Well, let me see him. The reason I have him in there specifically, I interviewed him in 2007 in Ecuador. He was the president of CONAI, which is a network of indigenous nationalities in Ecuador. And they have been involved in a national movement which actually stopped, I'm actually getting to the topic of the discussion, stopped a free trade treaty from happening between the United States and Ecuador, which is that's in Ecuador, which is uncommon. A lot of times when the United States wants to have such a treaty, they get it. they launched this huge mass movement, and they were able to stop it. They actually then went on to throw out the president, and the president followed that president, and then elect a new president, Rafael Correa, and also the country held a constituent assembly to write a new constitution. So there are these huge mass movements, and then the reason I bring him up, just because in the interview, within just a couple of paragraphs, he was able to bring together the concepts and the idea and the actuality of agroecology, of food sovereignty, of these people's movements for democracy, as opposed to the Green Revolution, free trade, and the failure of their state. And this was, he was there with just an example of the kind of people I was talking to in this interview. So,
Can you clarify for me what you mean by green revolution as opposed to what you're advocating here?
yes. Well, I'm real briefly, it's a marketing term for spreading Monsanto and Pioneer seeds all over the world.
Okay.
I mean, it's a lot of the expressions that we hear and talk about are actually sheer marketing. It's like the propaganda on top of the propaganda on top of the marketing. So ideas like green revolution sounds like a really great idea until you find out what they're actually talking about doing. But the same with ideas of development, which turns out is just bringing a certain system to different countries, or globalization, or a variety of terms like that. So I'm going to actually go into green revolution in detail. So why am I even talking about free trade, you might say, if it's not the case of food sovereignty? The reason is that food sovereignty is the response of these movements around the world to free trade, specifically. Just as agroecology, which is, I won't go into more detail, a relatively new invention of 20 years ago, but at the same time it's an invention that's hooked up to traditions that go on back for thousands of years. The idea of agroecology is the people's response to the Green Revolution. And free trade and the Green Revolution and agribusiness in general grew out of a specific U.S. invention. That U.S. invention was vertical integration of corporations. And within that is the whole idea of internalization of costs, which can sound rather silly, but let me make it simple. In many industries, or even in any the creation of any product, specifically food, say chickens, there are all kinds of levels that you go through in order to end up with a chicken on a plate. Shoot you the chickens. That's how you do. But you have lots of little baby chickens, and which you have to buy, and then you have to buy the roosters and the chickens that go with them. Then you have to buy these really expensive buildings to put the chickens in, and then you have to buy trucks in order to transport the chickens to a place where they kill the chickens, and then you have to refrigerate them, and then you put them in refrigerated trucks, and then you take those trucks to really large stores and you market them to people and you do advertising. Well, in the early stages of a lot of these industries, each one of those levels was a different business, and as the product went from one level to another, there would be discussion about, well, what the price is going to be and how a certain amount of profit can be made by businesses along the way. What was invented specifically in the United States after the Civil War in the 19th century was the idea of putting all of those different levels of business into one multi-unit corporation, so that there is no debate about the profit along the way. It all just accrues to the people at the top, what we now refer to as the 1%. The whole, it's an invention of a multi-unit corporation, and it's the verticalization of production. It's all under one management. When they brought that to agribusiness specifically, and even agribusiness is a name that was given to it. The verticalization of agriculture occurred in the 50s, when in response to, well, in the Depression, farmers were going out of business and they were being exploited, driven off their farms, and they developed various methods to make lives better for the farmers, which one brings in different types of loans and whatnot, and reserves for crops once they were grown. But, and that stabilized the economy and agriculture and food production for about 20 years. But after the Second World War, the business community and the banks wanted to regain their power, and they actually had a think tank at Cornell University at the same time as other people were thinking out neoliberal thoughts in universities in Chicago. They came up with these ideas in Cornell, which was simply the verticalization of agriculture. And some of their members who became members of Eisenhower, Truman, and Nixon administrations gave it a name. There's actually a man specifically who gave it a name. John Davis, I think, is the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture to Eisenhower. He said we need to give it a name, and they gave the name agribusiness. And this was all happening, this invention, at the same time as the marketing, or the invention and the marketing of hybrid seeds, the use of pesticides, and the use of fertilizers. Because I can't go on for hours, I'm going to have to snip past different things. So rather than go into the whole history of the Green Revolution, which actually was born in Mexico, not by Mexicans, but by United Statesmen, Americans. What it was bringing the verticalization of agriculture and taking it along with this development of these hybrid seeds and the use of pesticides, the use of herbicides and fertilizers, and sticking it in different countries. And what that gave the opportunity for giant corporations such as Monsanto or Pioneer Seeds, or the people that make tractors, or the people that make fertilizers, to go from country to country with the Green Revolution. There's a man who's been popping up every now and then, who, his name is Geraldo Fontes. He's with the MST in Brazil, Movimiento Sem Tierra, so people that did not have land until they had the MST. Now they have land because they went out and they occupied some land. He gave a definition of the Green Revolution, and he gave it 5 aspects. First of all, it's based on monoculture. Rather than biodiversity, it's based on monoculture. Go to Iowa. Go to most of the Midwestern states and large parts of California, and you just see entire states, entire counties with just one crop, whether it be corn or soy. Primarily, that's what they are. But even in other countries, you can apply the same technology or the same thought and grow oranges or whatever. You can only grow one thing, and you only grow one type of that particular seed, which of course is very dangerous if there a bug comes along and causes harm to that particular species. Then they're all going to die, and suddenly we don't have any corn, suddenly we don't have any soy. Secondly, it requires large tracts of land. The problem with large tracts of land is it didn't used to be large tracts of land. It used to be small family farms all over the world. And most of these movements are made up of small family farmers that are fighting back, or peasants in their areas, or indigenous people. So it is the undoing of the very structure of the labor and the land holding relations in all these countries. These are self-sustaining agricultural systems that have existed for thousands of years and are being systematically destroyed in a very short period of time by these concepts. Thirdly, there's the mechanization. This is a bummer. One, because it puts you out of work. but two, because it's completely based on hydrocarbons, on oil, which the next stage, the fourth element, which is, it's also all of the fertilizers and the herbicides and pesticides, all of these are also based on hydrocarbons. So there's been extensive studies done, particularly by this group in Spain called GRAIN, that over 40% of the hydrocarbons in the atmosphere that are causing global warming come from verticalized agriculture. If we were to just today end verticalized agriculture and go back to the traditional farming that indigenous people and peasants have been using for thousands of years, we could halve the problems we're having with climate change and global warming. And then the fifth thing that he pointed out was this whole stinking system, if you're in Brazil or in Bolivia or in India, is designed for export. The whole game of, in order to be a country, you have to export. I don't even know where that idea came from. If you're the people who live in that country, it's a bit of a problem. You're still not eating. And furthermore, you don't have the land on which you were growing the food to eat. So Vandana Shiva, we talked about, when I talked to her, she went ahead and added a few more points. These hybrid seeds, we're not even talking about GMOs, the hybrid seeds, in order for them to function properly, need lots of water. And a lot of these areas don't have water. And that's why there's been the building of giant dams all over the world, which A, mess up the areas that you have to build it in, but two, it often causes conflict, even violence, between the communities whose land is being taken, whose land is being flooded, whose land is whatever, who need to buy the water. Which gets to the second part of her particular point, was all of these things, the fertilizers, the herbicides, the pesticides, the seeds. Seeds was Monsanto was taken to the high level that you have to buy them every single year and sign a contract, and we will sue you and stick you in prison if you don't go by this, completely ending seed saving, which is the way that the farmers have worked for thousands of years. All of this causes debt which they weren't in before, debt which completely ruins and helps to drive people off of their land, and which has led to epidemics of suicide. And I'm talking thousands, hundreds of thousands of people killing themselves. In India, they often use the actual pesticides to kill themselves with, as the fauna is the ultimate pest that needs to be gotten out of the way. And then the second level, or the new version of the Green Revolution, is GMOs, genetically modified organisms, transgenics, as some people call it. And along which comes patents, the idea that you can patent life, that you can make private property out of of a seed. And oftentimes, yeah, they're patenting something that they made in a laboratory, which we can go into why that is a wrongful thing to do. But sometimes they just actually take people's local resources and patent them. So this is why I would like to say, if we were in the Spanish part for Monsanto, is the diablo del mundo. I mean, these people are bad. To use the military term, dividing the world into good people and bad people. So how does that get to free trade? Free trade is a marketing expression to promote an even broader international acceptance, if you want to use that word, of multi-unit corporations, as was specifically shown with the Green Revolution. Free trade is just a marketing expression which facilitates the bringing of what they themselves call structural adjustment programs to countries around the world. This whole idea, which many people call neoliberalism outside of the US, some people would call it, but if you go to other countries, it's common talk, is made up of, again, three aspects. One is and this also, was invented in the University of Chicago in the 60s by Milton Friedman and a band of other economists, and which they then put into practice first in Chile when they overthrew the government of Salvador Allende. The first thing Pinochet did was get on the phone to Chicago and say, well, how would you guys like to come down here and experiment with these new theories? And as far as they saw, it worked out just great. In fact, Margaret Thatcher thought these were good ideas, why don't we put them into practice in England? And then, of course, Ronald Reagan came along and applied them to the United States, and now they're being applied to the whole world. What the three aspects are: one, privatization of, I don't know, everything. But it starts off with privatizing the water, privatizing all the natural resources, turning them over to corporations so that the corporations can make their profit. Secondly, it requires that a country change their laws. They actually have to change their financial laws and their trade laws so that these large corporations are permitted to come into their countries and exploit the local banks, the local processes of industry, and the ownership of land. And three is the reduction of government services for the people. Why not throw that in there too? I mean, it's turning all the things like transportation, healthcare, Social Security, all those things get turned over to private corporations and are privatized, and you get austerity programs like we're seeing in Greece today, but you can look at it for the last 30, 40 years. So these policies allow multinational companies, under the guise of free trade, to come in and take over in a new, basically a new form of colonialism, a much more efficient form of colonialism. In fact, it's taking that whole idea of internalization of costs and applying it to how to run an empire. I mean, they even use it to how to run the military. Rather than doing what the British and the French used to do and move the whole army into a different country after country around the world, we just have a system of 720 plus military bases, which are directly funneled straight back to Washington, so that you don't have to set up a military bureaucracy in all these different countries. It's a much more efficient way of putting power around the world and implementing it where you need to implement it, and basically running the world without even looking like it. There are, again, three concepts on how to implement these policies. One way, and this often happens during a crisis in a country, a crisis like an economic collapse, like what's going on in Greece right now, or what happened in Argentina in the 90s, or a coup, like when Yeltsin took over in Russia in the 90s, or a tsunami, what happened with the big tsunami in Indonesia, what happened in Sri Lanka. Is all those kind of opportunities when there's a crisis, that country needs a loan in order to get out of the situation, really big loan, in order to get out of the situation and move forward. When people are not really looking at, frankly, at what's going on, they come in and they make these huge loans, and the deal is, in order for you to pay back this loan, in order for you to get this loan, you have to implement these policies. You have to do this privatization, you have to change the laws and regulations, and you have to start these austerity programs, which is why people in Europe are getting a lot of stuff right now. So a second approach is through the WTO, the World Trade Organization. In the past, this is an organization where many governments sent representatives to these discussions, and they talk about trade, to come up with various trade treaties, and oftentimes these were free trade treaties. That hasn't actually been working out so well recently with the rise of countries like Brazil and India and China and Russia in conjunction with peasant movements around the world. And it's sort of, don't hear too much about that these days. So the third method is, if that isn't working, let's just do it country by country. Let's do NAFTA, just a few countries, but mainly the target is really Mexico. or what they're doing, they've done it in South Korea, they've done it in Singapore, they've done it in Colombia, they wanted to do it in Ecuador, they've done it with Australia. It's a way of picking off country by country the idea of actually getting them to vote for free trade or having their government say, yeah, we want free trade because it benefits. There's always local beneficiaries. It benefits those people who are often in charge. So this has been going on for the last few decades, caused devastation to country after country, caused is the systemization of hunger. And ironically, one of the big brouhahas about the Green Revolution was it was supposed to do away with hunger. But when you combine it with this whole idea of free trade, you're actually systematizing hunger. You're actually taking people's well-known and historically understood thousand-year-old agricultural system and destroying them in order to have an agricultural system that is purely based on profit which goes back to the United States or Europe or Japan or wherever, and leaves these countries poor and hungry. So people came up with alternatives because people don't generally take this sort of stuff lying down. In 1993, a lot of these organizations, particularly indigenous peasant and farm organizations, came together and formed an organization called La Via Campesina, which is actually, if you add up all, it's a network of networks of networks. If you add up all the people in all those networks, there's like 200 million people, which has to be one of the biggest organizations in the world. But you don't hear about it because it's not the organization. I don't know why you don't hear about it. Probably because I don't want you to know. But it's not an organization in the centralized sense that we often think of organizations with some dude at the top telling people what to do and everyone marching in step. It's a network of networks. It's horizontally based, often consensus-driven organization. It sounds like Occupy, it's because it's very similar. They created this coming together in 1993, and in 1996 they came forward with the idea of food sovereignty. They actually announced it in Rome, which is where the UN, which is often the front for a lot of these organizations, meets to discuss food. And over the years it's been defined both defined and undefined in various ways, but there are 7 principles that you can look at for food sovereignty. First of all, it's the idea that food is a right, that we actually should eat, that it's for our nutrition, it's for so we can live, and it's not just a commodity to buy and sell, which is what it is being treated as right now. 2, food sovereignty involves agrarian reform, which is sort of like a sophisticated version of land reform. But land has to go back to the people that should be farming it, that were farming it. And there should be arrangements made so that they are able to do that. So it's very important. 3, that people want to, and the world should, protect our natural resources. 4, that we need to reorganize the food trade system, in other words, undo what's been done by free trade. 5, we need to end the globalization of hunger, because the implementation of the Green Revolution, the implementation of Monsanto's dreams has globalized hunger. 6, I didn't say 5, the last one I should. 6, this has to be done in an environment of social peace. And 7, there has to be democratic control, that the people need to be in charge of all of these changes, not the multinational corporations that caused the problem in the first place. And there's sort of there's a document that the Campesina has put out, and if you actually read the various parts of it, which I would have brought if I felt we were doing it in English, you can see that one of the underlying even preconditions of the whole thing is the equality of women. That women need to be able to control their land, their lives, to participate in the democratic control. That if we can't even have a horizontal relationship between men and women, there's pretty much no way we're going to be able to organize a horizontal and just relationship amongst people around the world. And a lot of the people that there's people in there that make this really clear to me. In fact, when I was in Mozambique at the Via Campesina conference in 2008, they were focusing the thing on two campaigns. One was food sovereignty throughout the world, and two was ending violence against women. And they've been very real and very systematic about bringing that up. If you look at what happened during the world, the forum meeting, call it, the social forum meeting that took place in West Africa last year, one of the main things, again, that was brought up there was to end violence against women. So repeatedly, that is made clear that women have to be equal participants in this entire process. And so the other final thing is agroecology, which relates to a lot of the aspects of what food sovereignty is. There are a lot of the people, that's a very cool guy, his name is Peaches, he's a great organism. Several of the people in the slideshow were actually participated in the creation of this idea of agroecology in Venezuela and Bolivia and in lots of other countries, and now it's being adopted throughout the world by Via Campesina member organizations in Indonesia and Central America. It's cropping up in the United States. And there are members of Via Campesina that are United States organizations, like the National Family Farm Coalition, and an organization of farm workers in Florida and the migrants in Texas. But agroecology is based on a traditional knowledge of biodiversity in agriculture. It's based on the idea that the energy for agriculture should come from the sun, not hydrocarbons. It's based on the idea that people should use and look after their indigenous seeds.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Oh, this is going to be a short discussion, but I am almost at the end. That we should use our indigenous resources. That we can use some parts of biodiversity to deal with other parts that maybe we consider a bit of a problem. So, for example, I discovered when I was in Bolivia that there's this horrible disease. It's not only in Bolivia, it's in many countries in the world, the Chagas disease. You may have heard of it. It's in the thatch. There's this little bug called the vinchuca that lives in like straw roofs that a lot of poor people have in different countries. And then they come down and they bite you in the night and you get this disease and you can die from it, and it's a horrible disease that basically affects poor people. Well, they've discovered through an understanding of biodiversity, of talking to people that live in an area and know that know nature around them, that there's a particular fungus that when introduced to vinchucas kills the little bastards. So you can actually control and save this disease and save the life of literally millions of people. That same approach, like the use of ladybugs in the fields, whatever, there are many ways that nature takes care of its inconsistencies, is what I'm saying. But again, bringing back to the social aspect, what people made very clear to me in their understanding of agroecology is that it involves an understanding of cultural identity. And, like I said, it's based on an understanding of the harmony of nature and seeing that needs to translate into creating social harmony. I think I should stop. So we were going to...
I guess my part of the discussion was, I was going to bring up the topic of
how this affects the local struggles here in the communities and in San Diego. I mean, we basically see it in the fact that there has been a struggle to get the city to accept people even having chickens in their homes and growing food and whatnot. Right now we're seeing the rise of all these community gardens. I know City Heights has, I know the IRC has the Aqua Farm down in City Heights, and that's a good start. Here down on Market, there's a People's Produce or People's Garden that is trying to come up, but the thing is that the community, it needs to be educated on this topic because it affects us all. Right now, for example, there's a struggle with Walmart down at Sherman Heights, okay? That used to be a farmer's market. Years ago, people used to, it was, before, like, I don't know how far back, you know, I don't know too much of the history as far as how far back it was, but when I remember when I was a kid, it used to be people, there's shops in there and whatnot, and, and the community would come in together and stuff. But that place could be used for the community to grow its own food and whatnot, but instead we have Walmart taking it and basically building their big store there that is it's basically gonna ruin the whole community there, because you're gonna have everyone from downtown and from the surrounding areas coming down to that specific area. So it's like the community needs a place where we can all grow our food. I mean, we can all make decisions of what happens with the land. But it also has to do with educating the community, and unfortunately we don't see it in schools where they don't teach us in schools on how to grow food. I remember going to school here and I never taught how to grow food. They never told me about GMOs and all these topics. So I mean, we can see the struggles here in the community as well, and unfortunately actually now it's moving on where we are being allowed to have chickens and miniature goats for milk and whatnot. So I mean, that's a good step forward, but I think that we do need to create these networks that are horizontal within the community where it's cooperatives. You know, we all cooperate and we all grow food for the community and whatnot. So, I mean, that's kind of the topic I wanted to bring up. Unless there's some other points, Nick, am I missing something? No. But I don't know. I guess we want to ask, what do you see locally that affects, you know, the community as far as how the decisions of these multinational corporations go?
Well, like what Nick was saying, with just the whole vertical integration of things, is we grow so much food here in our county.
Yeah.
Most of it's exported out of the state, where we're importing cheaper food or more, you know, just food from everywhere else, from other countries, and it's just so inefficient, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like this. So you're right. I mean, where does all the produce here in the community come from? I mean, I'm assuming that it's not locally grown here in the community. It's brought here, and and that's the problem. Because like you just pointed out, you know, there's all these details that go into it, transporting all this food, and you know, paying off this and paying off that, and all. So it's a hassle. Why not just have it here and provide it for the people in the community? And that's basically the point. So, I don't know.
I think either you guys can answer this question. I just have a question about genetically modified food. Does it have a psychological effect on like children, or does it affect the brain, or just curious?
We don't know yet.
Yeah, it's untested.
We don't know yet. It's relatively new. I mean, it's only been going on for, what, maybe 20, 30 years or so. And even that long, I mean, we don't know what the effects are on our bodies. That's the point. I mean, it's not tested. We're just consuming these genetically modified products that we don't know what's affecting us. I know, for example, you have the hormone that is injected into cows and milk. I mean, there's the thing that it's possibly causing, you know, rapid growth in kids, you know, as far as sexually developing kids, you know, at a rapid rate. That's the theory that's happening. I mean, we don't know what's happening with GMO corn or tomatoes or not. We don't know what effect it's going to have on our bodies.
But we do know, oh, so no, but
No, I was gonna say there have been a few studies that are linked to a rise in allergies and a lot of the younger, how far that was, how that those studies have been affecting to that effect.
Yeah, and she mentioned a study. I think I wouldn't be able to cite it, but I also read a study thing that it's showing negative effects in pigs that actually eat all this corn.